Well, brothers and my sisters, as I have been before you these last few Sundays, it has been my effort to express from a biblical perspective what in fact it is that we're dealing with all around the country, even as seen all around the world. We've tried to respond sermonically from the Gospel according to St. Mark. And so if you have your Bibles, turn there please to Mark chapter 5, and let's take a look at our foundational text, and then from that text, expound further upon what is taking place in our streets around us. The Gospel according to Mark records this way, beginning at verse 1. Remember, Mark was an eyewitness to the account that he writes about. And they came to the other side of the sea, that would be the Sea of Galilee, into the country of the Gadarenes. And when he had gotten out of the boat, immediately a man from the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. And he had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one was able to bind him anymore, not even with a chain, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been torn apart by him, and the shackles broken, Kailani, in pieces. And no one was strong enough to subdue him. Constantly, night and day, he was screaming among the tombs and in the mountains and gnashing himself with stones. And seeing Jesus from a distance, he ran up and he bowed down before him, and shouting with a loud voice, he said, "What business do we have with each other, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you, by God, do not torment me." For he had been saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And he was asking him, "What is your name?" And he said to him, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he had begun to implore him earnestly not to send them out of the country. We'll read much more in the weeks to come, but as we return to this text, we've tried to paint the picture of what really is a parallel in the spiritual realm to what's taking place around us in the natural realm. And that is, we've heard the voice of Brother George Floyd utter his last words on this earth, "I can't breathe." And as I've been thinking about this and meditating on this day after day, as we've been, like you, trying to make sense of it all, what came back to my mind was a song that I vividly remember hearing as I grew up. I've often said that I'm a son of the 60s, and I remember vividly, Kia, my days, even from now when I was a child, of what was going on. I remember vividly the sounds that were commonly uttered during that time. And I remember distinctly reflecting this week on the son of another Baptist preacher, Brother Marvin Gaye, as he was likewise a native Washingtonian. Back in 1971, he released the timeless testimony of a Black man living amidst the destruction and devastation of racism in his day. And you know, Kia, he lyrically lifts then the dilemma. He lyrically lifts the dilemma in the form of a question of introspection. He asks the question, "What's going on?" You may remember how it goes. It was originally inspired by folks that were experiencing police brutality of the day. And hit the rewind on that for me. Hold 1 second. He was responding to incidents of police brutality of his day. He was responding back to the 60s. He was looking back and looking around. He was responding back in the 60s, what had already begun to start to happen in the early 70s. And Marvin Gaye writes this song because it was penned by someone he knew very well, another victim of police brutality. And he raises in the form of a lyrical question a song that would hit the hot soul singles for 5 straight weeks, would cross over to the Billboard 100 at number 2, and likewise be dominated there as folks all around would listen. It ended up selling over 2 million copies, becoming Marvin Gaye's second most successful song. And this week, in preparation for the message, this sermonic iteration, "I Can't Breathe," thinking about what George Floyd said, I likewise look at what's going on now, what was going on then, and I raise the question, Kia, what's going on? He says, mother, mother, there's too many of us that crying. Brother, brother, brother. He says, there's far too many of us dying. He said, you know, we've got to find a way to bring some loving here today. Yeah, yeah. He then calls on fathers. Fathers, says, we don't need to escalate. He says, war is not the answer. For only love can conquer hate. And determined, he says, you know, we've got to find a way to bring some loving here today. Oh, yeah, we got to find a way. He talks about what's going on, picket lines and picket signs. He says, don't punish me, police, with brutality. Talk to me so you can see what's going on. And that's what folks all around the world are saying. What's going on? Tell me what's going on. And that classic Marvin Gaye sound gives that silky smooth, ah, yeah, 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 in that song. You can hear it, can't you? I hope you can hear it. And then he cries out, mother, mother. He said, everybody thinks we're wrong. But who are they to judge us? Back then he said, because our hair is long. And then he makes appeal again. He said, you know, we've got to find a way to bring some understanding here today. Oh. Again, the picket lines, the picket signs. Says, don't punish me with police brutality. Talk to me so you can see what's going on. The echo, what's going on? You ask the question, what's going on? So Marvin Gaye asked that question back in 1971. And it seems like it's appropriately being played out, not in a song that Motown produced, but being played out by people all around this country, from California all the way over here to the East Coast of Washington, D.C. But not just here, people are expressing their frustration as they're asking the same question, what in the world is going on? After all the progress that's been made, after all the advancements, after all the achievements, and after all the contributions that Black folks have made in this country and around the world, what in the world is going on that we would have yet another incident that was filmed or videotaped, rather, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, by those cops, those racist cops that took another brother down. I know why they took him down, because he was a 6'5" brother, probably about 245, 50 pounds, and they were intimidated by him, like unfortunately too many white men have been down through the years. And so it took multiple of them to take him down. Quite frankly, at the time that they took him down, he was yielding himself to them. So they pressed, you know the story. One of them, his knee in his neck, cutting off the blood circulation to his brain, blood flow to his brain. The other one presses his knee in his back. The other one holds his lower limbs. And what we see is that this brother breathes out his last breath. I can't breathe. What in the world is going on that we are in a country in this time, and not just in this country, but as others have taken up the mantle along with us around the world, they are echoing the same thing, because not only does it exist here in America, it exists all around the world. I'm thankful, like many of you Black brothers and sisters, that our white brothers and sisters from around the world have joined us, and they begin to come alongside those of us that hail from the motherland as they affirm our thematic mantra, Black Lives Matter. It's delighted my heart to see young white folks that are not like me, a son of the 60s, raising their fist in the hand with great sense of pride and indignation as they stand along with us. It's a blessing to realize that tens of thousands of folks from London and Scotland and Paris and Australia, Berlin, Belgium, Brussels, Mexico, New Zealand, Toronto, Iran, even Japan, and of course, many African countries like Kenya and South Africa, folks for the first time are raising their sense of consciousness. Folks for the first time are perhaps understanding and really contemplating what systematic racism really is. As we uttered with you our first time together, systematic racism is a form of racism that's expressed in and by the practice of social, economic, political, and I'll add today, religious institutions. It's reflected in the disparities regarding wealth, income, criminal justice, employment, housing, healthcare, political power, education, and religion, among some other factors. I'm encouraged that what's going on is folks around the country, those again who are not steeped in racism, but those who are much younger, far more conscious, far more even God conscious, are responding. We're seeing folks who are Christians respond, folks who are Muslims respond, folks who are Jewish respond, because it is a commonality among each of the three major religions, and even folks who are not religious recognize the standard tenet of God that we ought to love our neighbors and treat our neighbors even as we ourselves want to be treated. And so what's going on is that we've got solidarity where people are saying enough is enough. What's going on is that we've got a sense of coming together, a commitment for hopefully meaningful change. This madness they're saying, this madness we're saying must stop. As we look now and segue into the text, for the past 2 weeks, I've endeavored to argue my case from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 5, so far verses 1 to 7. And what we've tried to illustrate is the reason why we can't breathe. It's because, as I've tried to argue, that racism is a powerful spiritual demon. It's not something that just exists in the natural realm, in the sociological realm, in the economic realm, but it has a spiritual rooting and orientation. Number one, because we've argued before that because his name is Legion, as verse 9, the B clause says, my name is Legion, for we are many. And this demon of racism, like the demon of the text, tortures its victims. That we are able to see from verses 1 to 5. It does so from the underworld, that's verses 1 to 3a. It does show that it's forcibly uncontrollable, that's verse 3a to 3b to 4b. The efforts to control racism, like trying to control the demon of the text, are fearfully undeniable. And its effects, like racism, the demon in the text and the effects of racism are frightfully unabated. That's verse 5. Then, as we've introduced the fact that through the intervention of the power of the Lord God, El Elyon, and by the power of the Lord Jesus, as with the demon of the text, so it is true with the demon of racism, his terror can be vanquished. That's the next part of our study. We begin to look at it, verse 6, that extends to verse 13. To do so, like the demon of the text, the demon of racism, we must have a clear, it must have a clear evidence of Jesus. When you look back in the text at verse 6, you see that the demon comes in confrontation with Jesus. Jesus confronts him. And so in order for that man to be released from that demon, in order for racism to be released, there's got to be a clear confrontation of the Lord Jesus Christ. And as we pick up this text today, beginning at verse 7, Jesus has to be absolutely evident. What's amazing as we look at verse 7 is what takes place. We're reminded that we fight as Jesus was fighting, not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and against powers and against the rulers of darkness of this age, against the spiritual host of wickedness in heavenly places. That's what Paul reiterated in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 12. But when we come to verse 7 and following, we're almost shocked to see what those demonic spirits will do. We're almost shocked to see what the demon in the text actually does. Verse 8 tells us that Jesus had been saying to him, come out of the man, you unclean spirit. If you're taking notes, number 3, what's shocking about what takes place is that the demon in the text, like the demon of racism, that will actually try to exasperate Jesus. Now, in order to get this, look back again at verse 6. So remember, the man is in the tombs. He's making his dwelling in the tomb, but constantly night and day, he's screaming among the tombs and in the mountains, and he's gnashing himself with stones. And so verse 6 says, and the demon, seeing Jesus from a distance, ran up to him and bowed down before him. At first glance, you're thinking, like the King James has it, he's worshiping. He's not worshiping. However, he does recognize who Jesus is. He's not worshiping Jesus. He's bowing in a sense of subservience because he understands his place juxtaposed against that of Jesus and what he says next. But look at his posture. His posture is not one of worship. His posture is not one of humility. So likewise, the posture of racism cannot be dealt with in a passive kind of way, because the demon in the text, like the demon of racism, may pause for a minute as is taking place by the NFL, as is taking place by the NBA and some in government, not at the highest level of administration in this country. They're at least taking place to pause, but look at the posture in what verse 7 expresses. And shouting with a loud voice. He's on his knees, but the demon shouts with a loud voice, what business do we have with each other, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God, do not torment me. Oh, don't think that the demon in the text is being passive. Don't think that the demon in the text, because he recognizes his place, is altogether fully acting out his place. And when you look at this text, what's interesting is to see the posture. So you would say, how in the world can this happen? I'd suggest to you why. If you're following chronologically in the gospel, remember that before Jesus began his ministry, the Holy Spirit led Jesus into the wilderness to be tempted, to be tested by the devil. It is only after Jesus has been 40 days without food and water that the devil comes to him. And he attacks him. The devil comes to him and tests him. The devil comes to him and tempts him. And as I pointed out some time ago when preaching that passage, the devil doesn't just come at Jesus and back off once Jesus responds with the word, but he comes right back again. Jesus responds again the second time with the word, and the devil comes back again. And if you look at the final response in that interaction between Jesus and the devil himself, Jesus finally hits him hard with the word of God, and the devil departs. But Luke helps us understand a little bit better than does Matthew and Mark. For around verse 11 in Luke, the scripture is recorded this way. The devil departs for a more opportune time. The devil ain't gone nowhere. As we've seen, racism hadn't gone anywhere, but will return at a more opportune time. That's why we're having story upon story and illustration upon illustration of another black man, another black woman being tormented by the demonic spirit of racism at the hands of white racist men, especially. We remember there was Trayvon Martin departing back again for another opportune time. Eric Garner, over and over again, and then finally now Brother Floyd. So when we come to this text, see the demon for who he is. See racism for what it is. And the demon in the text, his posture, you can see it now. The demon in the text is being aggressive with Jesus. And you would ask, how in the world can a demon who understands he's subservient to Jesus be aggressive with Jesus? That's a longer reply than I have time to give today. But I remember asking in graduate school those same questions about professors. And the short answer is this, to help you, Kalani, understand it. The devil and the demons know that they're defeated. They know that they can't beat Jesus. They know that they can't win against God. But what their role is, what they've determined to do, is take advantage of every opportunity to give God a black eye, to take advantage of every opportunity to fight back, because that's what's happening in the text. See it. So why didn't the devil, after he was defeated in the Garden of Eden, just go away? He knows he's defeated. He knows that eventually that he and the demons will be tormented in the lake of hell. But what they are doing as their mission is trying to mess up everything that brings glory to God, bring confusion to everything that honors God, and in every way try to make division and make a separation and confusion and conflict between that which is intended to glorify God most, and that's humanity. Let's look to the text. So the demon in verse 7 shouts with a loud voice and almost challenges Jesus. What business do we have with each other? You got your business, I got my business. It's not time for me to be tormented. And then gives a tacit kind of appeal, asking him, have you come to torment me? But now we go to verse 8. Not only must the demon of racism, like the demon of the text, have a clear view of Jesus. Not only like racism must the demon in the text engage with Jesus, which we must engage with racism. But I want you not to get discouraged and get frustrated. And what I fear is that in the few weeks to come, that when the protests stop and when the rallying stops and when we push against racism, when that stops, it will simply fall back and not continue to engage. And if so, the devil will win, because the devil, like the demon, does what he does with Jesus next. Look at this. Thirdly, what the devil and like the demon text does is that the demon tries to exasperate Jesus. He tries to wear him down. The text, verse 8 says, for Jesus had been saying to him, the demon, come out of the man, you unclean spirit. Did you read that right? This is not an illustration that Mark records in the language of Greek that he used, the tenses that he uses to say, Jesus sees the man, says to the man, demon, come out, that's it. But the text says, for he had been saying to him, which according to the imperative voice from the words used, makes it clear that there's almost a back and forth, a back and forth, a back and forth. The demon is coming. You saw him shouting. You see him bow down, but he shouts at Jesus, and Jesus responds. The demon responds, and Jesus responds, and the demon responds, and Jesus responds, and the demon. That's the nature of racism. It will always respond. That's why you must always respond. Look. So the demon doesn't just leave. Jesus has been saying, come out of him. But look what happens. The demon rebuts and he rebuffs and he tries to rebel and try to find some way to refuse the command of Jesus, come out of the man, you unclean spirit. The demon is trying, through the power of the devil, is trying to exasperate the situation. He's trying to exacerbate the situation that Jesus is dealing with by the authority that is given to him. Jesus tells the man to come out, you unclean spirit. Jesus does so by the authority that he has. Later at the point of Jesus' resurrection from the grave in Matthew chapter 20:19, he'll say that all power is given to me. The word power there is the word exousia, which means authority. Jesus had all authority from the time he came to the earth. Remember, he's fully God and fully man simultaneously. Again, that's a much longer conversation or study on Christology, but he was at the point that he was born, he was fully God and fully man. In all of his divinic powers, he held them often in abeyance, but it did not mean that he did not have at the time all power. So the reason why the demon bows down is because he understands the exousia of Jesus. The reason why Jesus can speak to him in an authoritative way is because he has exousia, he has all power. Well, I want you to see that Jesus does with the demon what we must do with racism. He calls it out for what it is. Jesus is not trying to be politically correct. Oh, you fellow that's come from the Gadarenes that has some difficulty coping with, the influences from the underworld. I can understand. No, he's not like that. He's not wimpish. Another word I had in mind I can't use today. But Jesus calls this unclean spirit, he calls this demon for what he is, you unclean spirit, you demonic spirit from Satan, from the pit of hell. He says, I'm calling you out for who you are. If ever we're to win in the war against racism, we must likewise call it out wherever it exists, call it out for whatever it is, not be politically correct, but simply be right. These issues that people are claiming for, these issues that young adults in the streets are clarion for is not anything more than basic human rights and basic human dignity that ought to be afforded to every person. And I challenge everyone under the sound of my voice, after the immediacy of this crisis has passed, don't stop calling out racism for what it is. Don't be scared, don't be wimpish, but call it out for what it is. Racism has to be addressed. It has to be addressed as it was for this man for exactly what it is. You know why? Because the demon didn't want to be identified, and the demon of racism does not want to be identified as it embodies itself in people today at every level. Those who are racist in your neighborhood, they don't want to be identified until they feel a sense of strength. Those who are on your job, the managers and supervisors you have, the CEOs of your company, some of them are racist too. They don't want to be identified. Those who are in the NFL, they don't want to be identified. They simply tried to throw some jive foolishness. When my frat brother Colin Kaepernick took a knee to stand for justice, he wasn't standing against a flag. He said that from the get-go. But those who are racist in the media twisted his words, twisted what he was doing, tried to twist and reshape, and then raise racism, raise up through its spiritual demonic influences others that are in the NFL to try to get other players to speak against what he was doing and try to skew and obfuscate the real meaning of what he was saying. Colin Kaepernick has been consistent since day one, but all of a sudden now, Roger Goodell comes out, oh, we were wrong. Why weren't you wrong before? If you didn't have some tint of racism in you, Goodell, why did it take so long? And even though Goodell has said what he said, by the way, even though Goodell has said what he said, we haven't heard nothing from the people who are the CEOs of the teams. I refuse to call them owners because it's simply reflective of the plantation mentality that exists in the NFL, the NBA, and the MLB, like soccer as well. But we ain't heard nothing from those that are over the teams, those that control the team. Why? Because many of them are racist, and it works to their benefit to say nothing because they don't want to, like the individual that's in the White House, they don't want to upset their base that buy tickets, that buy those big boxes, that help build those stadiums and make them multi-billionaires. Don't tell me about whether they're not racist or not because you heard some black player give them a kudo and say, yeah, they're all right with me. Don't mean nothing. You can always measure where a person is by what they do, not what they say, and what they do when they're not pressed to do it or pressed to say it, but rather by what they do as a matter of character, as a matter of integrity, as a matter of who they really are. So Jesus, in trying to be politically correct, but the reality is, as I said, that we as folk tend to want to be politically correct. I hope that you get that garbage out of your system. It's not just white folks that struggle with it, but black people likewise struggle with it. And black folk need to learn to be clear that you are who you are. You are among people. You've assimilated into the majority right now, racially, of this country for generations now. But you need to be clear on who you are and who you're not. One of the problems with some black folk is that we have allowed white folks to suggest to us through the dominance of racism that we are less than who God has made us. There's some that believe that because they've been so inundated, they've been so overwhelmed, they believe that they're second-class citizens. They believe that they're prone to violence. They believe that they're inept. They believe that they're lacking in the capacity of academic achievement, inclined to self-inflicting abuse, prone to violence, prone to drug abuse, prone to crime. It's not true. That's not who you are. That may be who you become, but you need to understand that's who you have become, to the extent that you have become that because of the 400-year history of racism in this country and, yes, even around the world. As with the man in this text possessed with the unclean spirit, black folk need to understand that 400 years of demonic systematic racism has had its way of playing on your psyche that you don't recognize what you need to recognize. And that's what David said in Psalm 113 and verse 14, that I am fearfully and wonderfully made. How marvelous are your works. Always getting humanity in general. But the reality is that there's some particulars about black folk that are marvelously and wonderfully made by the Lord. It's about to be summertime. I went downtown Annapolis to take care of some business, and I saw some white ladies who were out, a couple white fellas who were out sunbathing, trying to get the tan. I remember times that I've gone on vacation to the Caribbean, to the Bahamas, to Jamaica, which I passionately love. And it amazes me how white folk that I see when they get on the plane, looking plain Jane with the long straight hair, but as soon as they get over there, I want to be in the sun 24/7, get the sisters to put the braids in their hair. Why? That didn't come from Europe. That's from us. Again, I'm not arguing that we're more fearfully and wonderfully made than y'all, but we are surely fearfully and wonderfully made. I wish I had time to really deal with this thing, but even in terms of the most beautiful women in the world, or the most beautiful men in the world, they have, let's see, how can I say? They have the shape, the contour, and the color of color. And that's all I'm going to say. You understand what I'm saying? So we need to understand and value all of humanity, but because the Black segment of humanity, because the Black segment of whom God has made has been skewed by racism, we need to raise it up. We need to value it. We need to appreciate it even more. So Black folk, you've got a job in this. But white people also have a problem with using the word race, using the term racism. Racist and non-racist white folks, those that have the sick satanic view that they are somehow superior as a race to Black people, somehow superior to Latinos, Asians, and others. So somehow they need to read rightly the Bibles that they tote, the Bibles that they run around claiming that they believe in on Sunday morning in their evangelical churches, way down in the South, in the antebellum South that almost seems like it still exists today. Need to go back and pick the Bibles up that you have and discover likewise what is the primary cause for what we're seeing today in terms of the oppression, in terms of the brutality by police perpetrated against Black men today, is because of the reality of racism. And you need to be honest with the fact that it's not just generations ago, it's not hundreds of years ago alone that there's been the influence and the control and the pervasiveness of racism, but as we're seeing, it exists even today. And through this text, as a point of application, Jesus wants both Black people and white people to take a hard look at themselves. See yourselves as God has made you. See yourselves as God has made you versus this demonic, divisive spirit. And so I challenge every white Christian to look in the mirror and ask the question, are you a racist? Ask the question, do you have racial tendencies, racist tendencies? Ask the question, how do you come? And by the way, don't just ask yourself. That's like in a situation between a husband and wife, or let's say the husband doesn't feel he's being treated right by his wife, and he raised it with his wife, but she says, I'm fine. And so she keeps asking herself, I'm fine. I think I'm fine. I don't think I do. I don't think. Ask him. Likewise, ask her. Likewise, I say to you, wife, ask your Black friends who are truly Black. I ain't talking about the ones that are perpetrating. I mean the ones that have a true identity and understand who they are, that are not confused about it. Ask them. And for some of you, I guess you got to give some of them permission. You ain't got to give me permission ever. I'll tell it like it is. And I'll call that as I've done all of my years as a young person, as a young adult, and in 39 years of ministry this month. Ask them, do you display those tendencies? So for some, you got to give them permission. Hey, Chuck, can you really just like tell me, do I seem like, I don't mean to, but do I come on? And so you can tell me, and then they'll get all upset and bent out of shape when they tell you. You got to take a look at yourselves and see who you really are. You know why? Back to the text. Jesus has been saying to the man, come out of him. He's been saying to the man, what's your identity? Here's what you need to see. The demon of racism, like the demon who's possessed the man in the text, does not want to be identified. Let me say it again. The demon in the text does not want to be identified, because otherwise he would identify himself to the people of the Gadarenes well before Jesus came. But it's only when Jesus comes that he confronts him with who he is, confronts him with how he's been acting. that the man has to deal with it. And so Jesus has been dealing with him. He's been saying to him, come out of the man. And the demon's pushing back. The demon's pushing back. I told you that the demon will push back as well as a demonic spirit of racism will push back. Because by the way, those who are white racists, they're going to push back. They don't want to be confronted and called out by Jesus. That's why they hang among themselves. They never, aside from the fact that they think they're superior, they only read certain sections of the scriptures that suggest that they're all right and that they're wonderful. They got white preachers that pretend and lie and don't tell the truth about who they really are. They don't want to be identified. Listen, we're seeing them come out of their bag now. We're seeing some of them manifest themselves now. But for the most part, let me see. If racists wanted to be, you put it in. If racists wanted to be identified, then how come after the Civil War forward to now, they wear white sheets on their heads and perpetrate crimes against black folk if they want to be identified? Certainly there are some alt-righters that have come flat out, and the reason why they've come out is because they've got a governmental system that allows them to come out, encourages them to come out, because some of those in the government, some of those in the court, some of those in the police department are members of their society. But they don't want to be really identified. And then there are those who are white but are not racist. They're uncomfortable with somebody saying that they're racist. And I've been in groups with fellas watching the sports games at a couple places over the years that I've gone to watch the game. And so by the grace of God, God helps me. Sometimes I don't really feel like being bothered, but I go to these environments where there's a mixed audience, and I just try to lay in the cut and just sort of watch the game and enjoy myself. But the nature of the circumstances caused me to be engaged, and I'm not an unapologetic black man. I'm not afraid or ashamed of who I am. And so I will engage with them in conversation, and I find when I raise issues based upon their responses. I remember when President Obama was first elected to office. It seemed, with the same group, it seemed fine. It was great. It was kind of something novel. But when he got reelected the second time, I was shocked by the same cats that I knew all of a sudden responded with such abrasiveness. They were so upset. They were so angry. And I'm like, well, remember you told me 4 years ago you wasn't right. Remember 4 years ago, this is a great change. Because you was hoping that Obama would be too black, but he'd sort of be right in the middle. He was far more in the middle than he was strong black. Thank God for what his blackness. I appreciate the pimp, like a whole lot of black folk do. But I appreciate the policies that he enacted. But I wish he'd done a whole lot more. But nonetheless, this is not a criticism about him, but rather criticism regarding white folk that claim not to be racist, but are all uncomfortable. If you're not a racist, then why are you uncomfortable talking about it? If you don't have racist tendencies, then why are you so uncomfortable? Why are you so anxious for us to get over it? Really? We don't say that to the Jews. You got a Holocaust museum downtown DC in the middle of the city. You're not saying to the Jews, why don't y'all get over it? But yet you want black folk to get over it? Are you out of your mind? Let me get back to the text here. So white racists don't want to be identified. White non-racists don't want to be identified. But let me tell you who else doesn't want to be identified and has trouble accepting the reality of the identification of racism. And that is privileged black folk, who I would argue have been psychologically, socially whitewashed in their thinking and in their identity. Too many black folk think they're white. They talk like they're white. They act like they're white. Cats that I know, there are guys that I know using the same spot we go to watch the game. A brother I know who I went to Morehouse with. So I know we talk all the time. We spend a whole lot of time together playing golf, known each other since we were a young men. But I find it ironic sometimes when he and others like him get around white folk. Well, oh, hi, hey, yeah. All of a sudden there's a complete difference in the tonation and the explanation. And really, a minute ago there, yo, what's up, man? You know what I'm saying? Nah, man, right. Well, yes, Team Bob. That listen, be true to who you are. I understand about being professional, and in professional forms we should be professional. What I'm talking about is that too many of us misperceive who we are. Too many of us, because we are assimilating into predominantly white culture. Too many of us, because we want to get in to major universities, get in to graduate school, get in to major white corporations, get into the NFL. We will change who we are And because in some cases we're accepted, and by the way, typically what I found is that more often than not, except in maybe some of what we see by those who are younger, you can't be too black, especially as a man, in a predominant white context and be accepted. Most white folk, and don't be this way. White folk, don't be this way. We accept you for who you are. We ain't asking you to be extra white, a little bit white, minimize white. But a black man who speaks like he's black, a black man who's conscious and woke and talks about issues, are y'all all of a sudden all uncomfortable? Well, I'm talking to you, black folk, because some of y'all listening right now, some of y'all viewing me, you are that one. You've been blessed to go to college, maybe a non-HBCU, and maybe you should have gone to an HBCU so you would have had an orientation to be reminded who you really are. But there are too many of us because we're able to get in, get through, and we're accepted, and they treat us nicely, listen, or they cheer us, or they celebrate us sometimes to a high extent. There's some of us who forget the heck who we are. Okay, you don't believe me? Ask Tiger Woods. Now let's see. If I remember correctly, back when he first came on the scene, by the way, Tiger has a mom who is Asian. His daddy is black, darker than me. Ain't no question who he was. And he tells a story, if you've seen the documentaries of how his father, who was a military man, a Vietnam vet, had to deal with racism then, had to deal with racism when he brought his son and introduced his son into golf. There were a whole lot of places they couldn't go without some kind of scrutiny. He wasn't unclear who he was then. But once he hit stardom, he comes out, he starts winning some tournaments. He don't want to be offensive. He's unclear about who he finds most attractive. That's a whole nother story. And so they ask him who he is. And I think Barbara Walters was asking him about his ethnicity. And he said, well, I'm Combination. What? I can't tell you what I said to my television when I'm Combination. What is Combination? And so anyhow. And so he thought that because white folks had received him so, and he comes on the 18th green and they scream and they holler. I watched him just last year when he was making his great comeback, and I was watching white folks scream and holler as they did from the very beginning. When he first breaks onto the scene, they're screaming and hollering, celebrating this black man, and he thinks, in my opinion, he's one of them. And so, if you think that way, black man, black woman, you're sadly mistaken, because time will reveal itself to you that they knew who you were from the beginning. They never forgotten, even though you have forgotten who you were. Let me see if I can illustrate this point. In 1997, in May, at the Masters, which is one of the premier events in golf, young Tiger Woods has a monumentous victory in the I think it was his first Masters that he won. But after he won, after he was celebrated by so many white folks, and by the way, Augusta, Georgia, in the South, he was celebrated. It wasn't till too long in the immediate aftermath of him winning that event that Fuzzy Zoeller, in his post-round interview, had a somewhat interesting remark that he made about the 20-year-old young black man. Here's what Fuzzy Zoeller said to reveal the reality of racism, those who are blatant with it and those who are covert with it. Here's what Fuzzy Zoeller said of the young man that just smashed him, whipped his tail, and beat every other white dude that was in the event. Fuzzy Zoeller says, listen to this. When asked about Tiger, he says, he's doing quite well. Pretty impressive. That little boy is driving well. He's putting well. He's doing everything it takes to win. So, you know, what you guys, so you know what you guys do when he gets in here. That another when he comes into where they were. He says you pat him on the back and you say congratulations and enjoy it and tell him not to serve fried chicken next year. Ha ha ha. Got it? Not to serve fried chicken next year, or collards, or whatever the hell they serve. This is what Fuzzy Zoeller, white man, says after Tiger plays at Augusta, where black folk were for decades not even allowed to join, more or less play, and he whips Tiger whips Fuzzy Zoeller's behind. And he calls him not a young black man, but this little boy, because that's what they do. And you see that, know it, and you say nothing? And I know a whole lot of black folk that saw that were quite indignant by the interview as they were talking about what the menu would be for, because the winner of the Masters gets to set the menu for what they eat afterwards in celebration. Really? That's what he said to you, Tiger? That's what a fuzzy zealous said? Well, maybe I'm confused. No, I'm not confused. It's Tiger Woods that went to Stanford. Fuzzy Zeller went to the University of Houston. Tiger Woods won the event, first place. In the same event, Fuzzy Zeller was beaten by 25 strokes. Tiger finished at 18 under. Fuzzy Zeller finished at 7 over. Really? Maybe you need more evidence. Same situation. Unfortunately, another brother who's unclear, in my opinion, on who he is. A few years later, he shifted his Tiger did his caddy, and he chose a caddy by the name of Steve Williams. And so he and Steve, won. Tiger won with Steve's help as a caddy, carrying the bag and giving some recommendation. Tiger Woods won. And you remember the embrace of them hugging each other. Great shot. You see Steve in front of cameras celebrating Tiger. No doubt he gets, by the way, the caddies get a big payday when the dude that they're caddying for wins. And so it will be Steve Williams, once Steve left Tiger and he went with Adam Scott, in 2011, it would be Steve Williams, listen, the caddy, who when Adam Scott, who he was caddying for then, wins the Bridgestone Invitational, here's Steve, not at the Players Awards ceremony, but Steve Williams is at the Caddies Awards party. And when asked about the competition between Adam Scott against Tiger Woods, Steve Williams says, and I quote, he said he badly wanted Adam to beat Woods. His exact words were, quote, I wanted to shove it up his black asshole. That's what the caddy, who was paid by the brother for years, celebrating him, but responds to him in this racist manner. The problem is that too many black folk don't realize who they are. Tiger Woods, I'm gonna argue my case one more time using you as a prototype example, because too many of us look to you as an example and we're mimicking your poor behavior in this area. There'll be another illustration, because I haven't forgotten. In 2013, when Sergio Garcia made a underhanded racial slam against Tiger Woods. It would be in England on Tuesday night that Garcia was asked about whether or not he would consider hosting Tiger for the 2013 US Open. And he said that he would, but these are the words he said. He would. He said, we'll have him around every night and we'll serve him fried chicken. You see what happened? When you let one of them get away with it, the next one will take advantage of it if you, black man, black woman, don't stand up for yourself. And guess what? I don't mean no harm, but we can't expect white folk to stand up for us. We can't expect white folk to march in the street for us. We can't expect white folk to be celebrating us Black Lives Matter when we don't act like Black Lives Matter. Their job is to help us. Our job is to lead the way. Thank God for them and what they're saying. But we have the responsibility to not forget about who we are, not forget, because when you do, you forget about the pervasiveness of racism that's around you. It's amazing. Back to Tiger Woods. In conclusion, for him, Tiger Woods has won 82 events on the PGA, 82 wins. He has won 15 majors. Oh, I know Fuzzy Zeller and Sergio Garcia must be superior to him. No, Sergio Garcia has only won 10 matches, where Tiger's won 82. Sergio only has 2 majors, whereas Tiger has 15. Fuzzy Zeller has only had 10 wins compared to Tiger's 82, and he's only won 2 majors to Tiger's 15. But he really thinks that he has a right to say that? Yes, because racism, like the demon in the text, goes unchecked and will challenge and will engage and will exasperate and will exacerbate the situation unless it's called out, unless it's dealt with, unless it's challenged. We come back to the text. I'm losing my time. And we find that the demon responds to Jesus in a crazy way in that he tries to exasperate Jesus. Imagine that the demon tries to exasperate the Son of God. Well, perhaps he thinks that Jesus is tired again. He's come back at a more opportune time. Perhaps, like the disciples, he thinks Jesus may be scared again. But the fourth thing that we find out from this text in verse 9 is the text says that Jesus was asking him, first of all, had been saying to him, come out, you unclean spirit, calling him for what he is. But then secondly, Jesus, the text says in verse 9, had said to him, had been asking him, what is your name? Listen, he had been saying to him, come out. The demon was giving pushback, rebuttal, and rebuff. Verse 9 says, he was asking him, what is your name? So the same tense of the verb in the voice, the imperative is used here, that Jesus is challenging, the demon is resisting. Jesus is challenging. He says, hey, what's your name? What is who are you really? And the demon is pushing back. Again, expect racism to keep pushing back. Let's get to the text. Jesus shows, okay, what at the end of the day, what has to happen with racism, at the end of the day, what has to happen with a demon is that it's got to be exercised by Jesus. Look what happens. So Jesus has been asking the man, what's your name? And so far, up to this moment, the demon hadn't replied and given him an answer. But now I want you to see, listen carefully to the question and the answer. Jesus asks singularly, what is your name? The demon responds in the plural, my name is Legion, for we are many. Wait a minute. Now, the man was up in the tombs, living in the mountain, cutting himself, half naked most of the time, screaming and hollering, screechy, low, guttural, high-pitched sounds, runs to Jesus, confronts Jesus, bends down, but shouts at Jesus, engaging back and forth with Jesus. When Jesus says, you need to come out of him. And they said, what's your name? And Jesus asked the question, Mark know how to write singular versus plural. Jesus asked the question in the singular, what is your name? And the demon responds back like we don't expect that we're going to see it, hear it. He responds in the plural. He said, my name is Legion, for we are many. Did you should know that Jesus asked the question to the man because perhaps he wants to jar him and challenge him to remember his true identity. He asked the question on behalf of the disciples and the townspeople and those of us who are subsequent readers of the Gospel of Mark so that we can understand what's really going on and make the appropriate application in our day and time. But most likely and most importantly, he's speaking to the demon so that he can deal with the demon, revealing the name of the demon. Listen, revealing the name of the demon will reveal the complexity of the demon, will reveal how comprehensive the influence of the demon, and will reveal how the demons got to be dealt with in light of who the demon identifies himself as. Look to the text. Jesus said, what's your name? And the man responds, the demon and the man responds, my name is Legion, for we are many. Listen here. The word legion from the Greek is a Greek term that's been adopted from the Latin. It's a term that speaks of the largest regiment of Roman soldiers, whose number varied from time to time, but by the time of Augustine, a legion represented 6,826 troops. In that legion, there will be 6,100 foot soldiers and 726 horsemen. Wait a minute. Damon, what's your name again? Your name is in the plural. Your name is Legion. You mean that you represent or embody not one demon, but you represent many demons, and the many demons to which you enumerate yourself by is Legion, that has that's numbered at 6,826. Listen here. You now get it. This man doesn't have one demon, but he has 6,826 demons. One man possessed by 6,826 demons. My God, now we understand the vastness of the power. Now we understand how they victimize and cause destruction, and how they torture and how they torment both this man and his community. Don't forget the man, the demon in the man was torturing and tormenting the man, but he's also tormenting and torturing the people in the entire community, because that's what the demon of racism does. It torments the individuals that are embodied by it. It torments the individuals that are influenced by it. It torments the individuals that are likewise impacted by it. And it's not just one. This demon says, I'll tell you my name. My name is 6,826. We're not just 6,826. We're 6,826 of the most feared demons. The legion as a Roman cohort was the most powerful, feared group among the groups of Roman soldiers. Understand who racism really is. Look at the incalculable victimization of racism. Racism, as I've been arguing, is rooted in a demonic spirit. It manifests in the sociological. It manifests in the economic. It manifests, yes, I want to close today, in the religious realm. But understand that racism is a demon, or rather many demons, that has possessed and influenced many people over many years. No, and by the way, it's not just 400 years. 400 years has to do with the demonic influence of racism on Black people. Before us, it was the Native Americans who were terrorized. Oh yeah, we use the term terrorist now to describe other people that go in and wreak havoc upon others. Guess what? White America terrorized from England, from Britain, on behalf, sponsored by, funded by, armed by, equipped by, and obliterated the reddish brown people of this country, who are the original Americans, because of the demonic spirit of racism that was permeating in so many white folks who, remember, came here on the Santa Maria, whatever the other two ships were, the Nina, the Mia, the Santa Maria, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. They came here allegedly for religious freedom and opportunity, but they came as oppressors, as unfortunately too many white folk have done all around the world. Be honest with your own history and write it right. The demon identifies himself, but before this, he doesn't want to be identified. I don't have time, but I could take you back over to 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 4, where Paul talks about the fact, he says, if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those to whom Satan, the god of this world, has blinded the minds of people, lest they see the glorious light of the gospel. The fact of the matter is that racism does not want to be identified. It wants to continue to blind people that it's something else. But in reality, it is what it is. It is white suppression. It is a perspective of white superiority that is dominated upon a people. And again, it's not just in the context of society broadly. It is all around. We've got to call it out for what it is. Jesus does so. He says, you unclean spirit. You've got to call racism for what it is. Spiritually, it's an unclean spirit. Sociologically, economically, educated, it is an unacceptable malady. It is an unacceptable horror that has overtaken. We got to call it what it is. Jesus says, what's your name? He tells him what his name is. We've got to challenge and call out racism so it identifies itself. So that, if possible, folk can be exorcised from it, cleansed from it, delivered from it. For when those who perpetuate racism, more often than not, white males in high position, they don't realize that they need to be exorcised from the demon of racism. But if and when they do, then they can help facilitate freedom for all. but because they've got the power, in too many cases, they continue to be pervasive in their predominance of racism, and because we don't call it out. And when I say we, I'm talking about in particular the church. We don't call it out. We've got to do what Jesus did. We've got to command that it comes out. And that's exactly what's happening. I thank God again for so many young people around the world that are calling it out. They're calling it out, yes, Black Lives Matter, calling out, stop the violence, calling out, stop, amen, police brutality. Put them in jail, lock them up. Don't just charge them with a crime. And we're going to see whether or not how that unfolds, by the way. Don't take a week to charge them with a crime before they get arrested, when disproportionately we arrested very immediately and very differently. But not only charge them with a crime, but lock them up, don't let them out. It's a hate crime. Charge them with a crime, and then when they go before judges, we need to see what happens then. Racism rears its ugly head again, because all too often you got white-sheeted judges who may or may not even allow the case to come to them. Don't miss that. Or if they do have the case, a judge going to have to hear this case because of the pressure from what is being experienced globally. But the real question is whether or not a jury will find him guilty. And then the question will be for the officer on his neck and the officer on his back and the others that were aiding and abetting the crime. The real question is going to be, where is racism then? I suspect it will be alive and well then in the courtroom, in the jury chambers. It'll be alive and well from where the judge sits, just as it has been for decades, as it has been since Trump has appointed more racist white judges to serve on his behalf and act on behalf of his party, act on behalf of his Sheik Clan crew. The reality is that many of us will never get justice because of who is in position, because of the racist demon that has a hold of it. We got to call it out. Who's we? All people. And by the way, I'm blessed and I'm encouraged to see so many young people, not necessarily people from church, but just from society at large. Some from church, some from synagogue, some from mosque, some who are not necessarily God-fearing people at all. And by the way, that's an indictment against the church. It's an indictment against the church. Why isn't the church leading the effort? I'll tell you why. For the same reason why the church majority did not lead the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was led by the church. The civil rights movement was led by predominantly the Black church. And after we made our case, after the after the exquisite leadership of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., after he did a wonderful job portraying that he was the right leader indeed for the time, even though many in the National Baptists didn't think so, that even caused a splinter and a split and the partial formation, reason for the formation of the Progressive National Baptist Convention. The Black church led the civil rights movement in that era and before, but it wasn't until later that white folks joined with us. But the reality is the majority of Protestant churches did not lead the civil rights movement. Why? I argue because they got racism all up in them too. I argue because racism has a stranglehold on the church. I argue the reason why the civil rights movement was not led by predominantly white churches from the South is because too many of those white churches from the South, predominantly Southern Baptists, had been finding a way to obfuscate the gospel, a way to skirt around the issues of righteousness and justice as to what justice, misfit from the Hebrew, really means, have been able to omit it and keep going to church, owning their plantation, owning their subsequent plantation, and oppressing Black people, going to church, and their preachers and their pastors wouldn't say nothing because they were too scared about their money. They were too scared of what would happen if they spoke out against slavery, spoke out against oppression, spoke out against oppressive masters that were there. I really wish I had time to argue this case more, but let me conclude with this level of the argument of the case. The reason why, and again, I'm thankful, I'm really grateful. There were so many young white folks in this country, around the world, that are rallying on behalf of Brother George Floyd, rallying, affirming that Black Lives Matter. I'm so thankful for them. But I repeat, it is an indictment on the institution of the church. Why haven't Protestant leading preachers in this country been saying? I don't care nothing about no dude from Houston that's got a stadium-like church and now as an aftermath comes out and has something to say about it. Joel Osteen ain't saying nothing about it before. And y'all want to run after him? Foolish. You want to run after a man that does not been championing your rights from the very beginning, and now you want to believe that he's a champion for justice because he marched for a hot minute with some people in the street? That's foolishness. I'm gonna say something my wife had to edit out of this video. Racism is rampant in most of our Protestant denominations, among Baptists, Methodists, Lutherans, so-called evangelicals, Pentecostals, Presbyterian, as well as many other groups. Even our Anglican churches, the Catholic Church and the Episcopal Church, is not free from the indictment that it too has racism even in its rooting. It has racism among it. It's got racism, especially at the top. You think I'm wrong? Then explain to me how all of our, almost all of our major denominations have not had, or only until recently have ever had a black man, I mean a real black man up top. None of them have for decades, for generations. They claim love. They claim Jesus wants us to love our neighbor by ourselves. But yeah, we can love our neighbor by ourselves as long as he stays in the field and doesn't come up and be in charge. Yeah, we can love our black brothers and our black sisters as long as they stay in the pew and they're not trying to get in the pulpit. And once in the pulpit, not to get into the senior level of leadership. Oh, and some of y'all got deluded by a group that I'm well acquainted with, the Southern Baptist Convention. I've been affiliated with them, had been affiliated with them for many years. And like many brothers from the inside tried to make change. But I'm done with that foolishness. Why? Because even though they claim otherwise, they are racist to the core. Let me prove my point. In July 2012, the Southern Baptist Convention at one of their annual meetings came forth and issued a statement of apology for where they've been, having been on the wrong side of slavery and racism. And on the heels of that, they elect their first black president. I repeat, that didn't take place until 2012. And so when this happened, I was with a group of Southern Baptist brothers, white and black. And so the white guys who I believe are not racist were celebrating, oh, this is wonderful. This is fantastic. Look at, we're all this wonderful kumbaya. We're all this together. And I didn't believe that foolishness then. And I didn't believe it once I further did some digging. I have another friend from Birmingham, Alabama, whose name I'll leave nameless for the moment, that has had a 30-year period where he's been active with the Southern Baptist. And I've argued with him. We've gone back and forth in full-on arguments, even though we're friends, about why he's arguing I should be engaged, and I'm arguing I should not be because of racist. And how can he, a brother from Birmingham, who's dealt with segregation in the antebellum side, how can you? And so we've gone back and forth and back and forth. And so he invited me to come with him down to Nashville. I should have known I was being set up, Dixon. He invites me to come with him down to Nashville and engage in conversation around these issues. And they had a fellow, I won't mention his name, who sounded to me, using the old term that still fits, a real house Negro. He was accepted into one of their seminaries, graduating one of their seminaries, teaching now one of their seminaries, pastoring in one of our churches, by the way, up this area, and given the great pretense of his strong blackness. But the tonation and the theory of the point of argument was simply like the same that came from the plantation. Real quick, on the plantation, you had three classes of folks. You had your field Negroes, and then you had the drivers or overseers, who were typically still slaves, but they were upgraded from being in the fields, but they were in charge of controlling the black folks in the fields, controlling the Negroes in the fields, and making sure they produced enough of whatever they were producing. They then reported to the next one, who was a lower class white fella who was in charge of making sure all that ran, and they all acted on behalf of the master in the big house. And in the big house, there were some of us who, because our mamas and grandmothers were raped, had a light-skinned complexion, were allowed up in the big house as servants of the master in the big house. And with that, master, how we doing today? I don't know how he's doing, how you doing? Anyhow. And so what typically happens in a scenario is, because you got somebody further up the chain, somehow there's an impression these days if they're black, and if they're the higher up the chain they go, the organization must not be racist. And that was a pretense that I will argue the Southern Baptists were trying to purport. So in 2012, a good brother, I mean a God-fearing brother, devoted black pastor by the name of Dr. Fred Luter, became the first black elected president of the Southern Baptist Convention. And I thought that, progress had been made, and I guess some progress had been made, until I started delving down into that conference that I attended, until I started engaging and debating with those that were simply trying to perpetuate the plantation mentality in the ecclesiastical environment. And then I started asking some questions. And what shocked me was, well, I'm not going to mention these fellows' names, they were men who, when I was actively involved with the Southern Baptists, black men who we were trying to push up. Black men, we were trying to push up the chain, push into leadership, because our misperception is that change comes from within, not from without. No, change comes when you call out a demon. Change comes when you call it out and command it to get in line with God. That's when change takes place. But nonetheless, I'm in this conference with these brothers who I remember from when I was a young 20-something-year-old preacher who finally had arisen to position. And then over the next year to two, I learned about really who has the power in the Southern Baptist Convention. It ain't the president. It's not the figurehead that they put up. No offense, Dr. Luter, it wasn't you. It wasn't the figurehead that was in charge, but there was a man by the name of Kevin Ezell, who was a preacher, was a pastor, earned doctorate church degree. And systematically, because I know the brothers he did it to and talk with them, systematically over a year process, began to strip them of their power, castrate them of their budgets, and in the next year or so, eliminated every last one of their positions from previous positions of leadership. Listen, if the demon of racism is to be dealt with in community, if the demon of racism is to come out of government, if the demon of racism is to ever come out of the judicial system, if it's ever to come out of athletics, it must first come out of the church. The church has got to deal with its own racism. The church has got to deal with its own demons of racism that are pervasive today. And what has to happen is that demon has to be exorcised. What has to happen is that we've got to, for those of us who've been fortunate enough, whether in the ecclesiastical environment, in the economic arena, in government, we got to stop being mealy-mouthed and stop acting like house Negroes and call it out for who it is. Whatever happened to the ideology of W.E.B. Du Bois? The objective was not for one black man or one black woman to get in, but for us to get in and then not to forget about who we are and to reach back and bring forward and bring along those of the rest of our people to stand with us so that they can be better. But the problem is in my generation. That's what my parents and grandparents and before them generation did. But my generation has become selfish. My generation is about me, myself, and I. It's about I got mine, you got yours to get. And our generation has gotten it, and we claim this Clarence Thomas foolishness about pulling yourself up by your own bootstrap. Look at here, black man, black woman. You wouldn't have had no boots to put on. You wouldn't have had no bootstraps to strap up if it wasn't for other black folk that have made sacrifices for you down through the years and have marched in the days gone by, have been beaten in days gone by, been fire holes in days gone by, have been thrown in jail in days gone by, fighting against and standing against racism. In order for us ever to breathe again, in order for us ever to catch our breath, in order for there ever to be a sense of righteousness of the church, judgment starts with the church. And likewise, bringing about an end and cessation of racism, it's got to start with the church, that those that claim to be Christian, stand up for who you claim to be and call it out for what it is. The spotlight is on you, church leaders. And I challenge every pew member, put the spotlight of challenge on the leaders of your congregation. Put it on the leaders of your denomination. And for those of us who are part of black denominations, put it on them as well. Tell them to stop preaching this foolishness about a prosperity. What has a prosperity gospel gotten you? But a deception to think that we're going to have a little bit of economic progress and we're all right. But yet still, you can have that degree. You can be a black man or woman with a doctorate degree and get stopped for driving while black. Get killed for jogging while black. Get arrested for walking while black. get arrested for sleeping while black. You better wake up and understand what time it really is. Stop placating, preachers. Stop allowing yourself to be placated, my brothers and my sisters. And take a stand for what really is going on. Take a stand against racism. In the name of Jesus, by the power of Jesus, by the word of Jesus, advancing the true kingdom of Jesus, preaching the full gospel of Jesus, call it out and command that it come out. That's really what's going on.